coordinators. So when you have some complaint concerns or anything, just reach to them and ask them the questions or anything you have. We are here to make your life easy and very engaging and entertaining. So the organizers are, my name is Uni, one of them. Christine, she is not here. Satya, where is Satya?
He's helping somebody somewhere.
Okay. And Sangeeta, she's not here. Kevin, and then Razila. So before we start, I just want to mention the sponsors. The first is Thomson Reuters. So they are sponsoring with space, food, drinks. So thank you, Thomson Reuters. And then Manning. So this is Manning publication. They are giving us 2 free ebooks as a door prizes. The next one is the Great City. So they are actually going to give us. They are sponsoring the speaker, right? Sponsoring the speaker, and we have some T-shirts and some water bottles up there. If you haven't picked up, it's over there in the cafeteria. Please help yourself. The next one is Squares. So they are hosting a 3-day event in Grapevine, I think. It's in Grapevine. It is for the UX and the front-end development conference. So they are giving a 15% off on the ticket with this coupon, and also they are giving 1 free conference ticket. So that will be used as a door prize at the end. So our door prizes are, we have 2 $25 Amazon gift cards, 2 ebook, and 1 Square conference ticket. So with that, so we have speaker Ross, let me say the last name properly, Dederer, right? So Ross Dederer, so he is from Component One. So he's a developer relation engineer at Component One, and basically you go around places helping them with the technology solutions. So he's been to a lot of conferences, giving talks and helping people with technology issues and working with the corporate clients. So with that, I'll hand it to you. Thank you so much. Oh, by the way, sorry, I forgot. Everyone got this one? So this is what we are going to use to get do the door prizes. So make sure you get one, okay?
So hello everyone. This is the Angular 2 discussion today. Thanks again to Uni for putting this together and inviting me down, as well as Thomson Reuters for letting us use this beautiful room. I think this is by far the best room I've spoken in. Just to tell you a little bit more about myself, my name is Ross Dederer. I work on the developer relations team with our Wijmo product. For those of you that aren't familiar with Wijmo, we sell JavaScript UI controls. These are things like grids, charts, inputs, a lot of line of business stuff. Part of my role at Wijmo is always researching new frameworks, learning new frameworks, and hopefully helping you guys wrap your head around these new frameworks as well. So what we're going to be talking about today is what Angular 2 is. I want to share some of the experiences I've had. I also want to introduce TypeScript. How many of you guys in the room have used TypeScript before? Okay, good. So I'll start kind of from the beginning there, and I will compare it to JavaScript to help you guys out. Then we're going to move into an application which I call the Data Services Quick Start application. This is an application that was developed by Microsoft back in 2007 in Silverlight. We've converted it over to Angular 1 and to Angular 2, so I will be continuing sort of that migration story today for you guys. I want to touch on type safety just because we'll be talking about TypeScript, and then in Angular 2 there's some new data binding characteristics and methods as well. And then I'll show you guys how we can actually migrate our view over to Angular 2, to an Angular 2 template, because this is something sort of new. So this is what the application looks like if you've never seen it before. If you're interested in learning more about the Silverlight to MVVM conversion, I would encourage you guys to check out our MVVM to HTML5, or Silverlight to HTML5 webinar that we have. That kind of kickstarted this whole migration story. And I chose this application because we're literally using the same backends here that we used in our Angular 1 sample. And it's the same backend that you're actually going to find in the Silverlight code as well. So we're going to be using the same OData connections in our Angular 2 app, which really made life a lot easier for me personally, because I could kind of lean on knowing that one thing is okay. This is a nice sample because since it's using HTML5 now, we can virtually run this anywhere, unlike Silverlight. So that's why. So let's go ahead and continue that story today. So Angular 2, how many people have actually used Angular 2 before? Okay, cool, so a few of you. And just out of curiosity, how many of you guys have worked with Angular 1? Okay, good, so very, very good. So for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with Angular 2, to put it really simply, Angular 2 is a framework. You can use it to help build client applications in HTML and JavaScript. So today I'm going to show you how to build a component, and along the way I'll cover some other Angular 2 topics. So let's talk about what a typical Angular 2 application process would look like. So we begin by writing applications by composing HTML templates with Angular markup. We're going to add component classes to manage those templates, and we're going to add application logic and services. And then finally, we'll hand off the top root component to Angular Bootstrap. In this talk today, I want to cover some of these high-level topics. So Angular 2 is broken down into 8 main building blocks. These are going to include things like a module, a component, a template, metadata and decorators, data binding, services, directives, and finally, dependency injection. So a few of these are going to be outside the scope of the migration story today, but I will kind of touch base on those. And for those of you that haven't looked at Angular 2's documentation yet, it's angular.io is where you can go to find it. And Angular 2's documentation is actually broken down into 2 tracks. One of these is for the TypeScript learning, and the other is for the JavaScript learning. So for my migration, for the rest of the talk, I'm going to be focusing mainly on the TypeScript track. But just be aware when you do get to the documentation at the top, you can change whether or not you want to work with JavaScript or TypeScript. So I thought I'd share some of my first impressions of Angular 2. I noticed that going through the 5-minute quick start that we're really going to have better encapsulation here. And this is due to our components. And I'll get into this later in the talk. Better performance is also going to be a nice feature. We're going to have faster initial loads. We can do things like server-side pre-rendering for like SEO or something like this. And they actually changed around the change detection algorithm, so Angular is going to notice changes in the view quicker. In my opinion, I think Angular 2 is actually simpler than Angular 1. And the reason for this is we're going to delegate tasks to the JavaScript interpreter, and it's going to allow us to sort of leverage HTML5 more efficiently. And of course, I really like the TypeScript integration. So here's an image from Google's documentation. I copied this right out of the documentation, so you should see it when you go there. But I think it does a really good job showing you kind of the role of each component or each building block. You can see on the left-hand side we have our module components, or we have our modules, and these modules export things like components or services, or return a value, or have some type of function. Below that, we're going to have our injectors, which are going to inject some sort of service into our components. For this demonstration today, I did not actually use a data service to get the data, so I'm not going to be referring to services too much or injectors too much during the rest of this. But once we have our component built, you'll see how easy it is to actually add an injector and a service into your component. We will, however, spend some time working with templates, metadata and decorators, and components. And after we've discussed some templating and components, I want to walk you guys through property and event binding, because we will have that in our view in our application. But before we get too carried away with Angular 2, I wanted to sort of introduce TypeScript for you guys, for those of you that haven't seen TypeScript before. So TypeScript is a programming language developed and maintained by Microsoft, and it's provided free and open source. Anders Hallsberg, I apologize if I pronounced that name wrong. He is the founding father of C#, and he's the one that actually developed TypeScript. So as you'll see in the slides and in our code, our TypeScript might actually start looking more like C# than it actually does JavaScript. So for those of you coming from a .NET C# background, this should feel very natural. You can use Node.js if you'd like to install TypeScript, the TypeScript compiler. All you have to do is just do npm install TypeScript, and that'll install it for you. If you're interested, and if you already have installed and you want to know what version you are, I believe it's just tsc-v, and we'll print out the version number for you. I, however, personally like to use Visual Studio for my development. And TypeScript is actually supported, it's built right into Visual Studio 2013 v2 and on. Today I'll actually be using Visual Studio 2015 for the demo. And the nice thing about using TypeScript is that we're going to be able to find errors in our application logic at design time, as opposed to doing this at runtime in the browser's debugger. You know, finding errors at runtime can sometimes either be too late, or perhaps they're too difficult to address, or you might not even know they're there at runtime. So I'll show you guys what I'm referring to when we actually get to the demonstration. It's kind of cool. So if you've never worked with TypeScript before, it's okay. It's really easy to pick up and learn if you already know JavaScript. In fact, at runtime, your TypeScript is actually going to be transpiled into JavaScript. So as you write your TypeScript, your browsers aren't going to actually be running that TypeScript code. They're actually going to be running the transpiled JavaScript code. But TypeScript will do some things for us, like create a map file. So if we get an error in our JavaScript, we'll actually know where in our TypeScript we have to go back to find that error. So the first time I heard transpilation or transcompilation, I was kind of confused, so I figured I would define it for you guys. What we're referring to here is actually a source-to-source compilation, which means that we're going to take the source code of a program written in one programming language as an input, and we're going to output the equivalent source code in another programming language. As I mentioned, there is the map file, so you can go back and figure out, if you set breakpoints in your runtime, you can go back to your TypeScript and find out where that is. But the key takeaway here is that we're really not abstracting anything. We're staying at the same level of abstraction. So an example of this would be like converting Pascal to C. So you see here on the left-hand side of our picture, we have some TypeScript. That should kind of start looking like C# code for those of you that are familiar with C#. But of course, looking like C# is not enough to convince C# developers to pick up TypeScript and start developing it for the first time. C# developers, they like to use a lot of built-in tools such as like IntelliSense. And if you're a JavaScript developer, you're probably not too familiar with IntelliSense because it's never really been around for us. Well, luckily, TypeScript is actually going to bring in IntelliSense support for us. So IntelliSense is actually going to be a feature of TypeScript. It's not exclusive to Angular 2, but it makes developing Angular 2 really, really easy. I'm sure any C# developers in the room probably use IntelliSense quite heavily, and it basically allows you to do sort of your self-documentation. So what do I mean by this? So up in the top left, you'll see our JavaScript code, which is our Angular 1 code. And you'll see here that as I'm typing scope.orders.call, it's only going to populate things in the application that I've already told it's there. So I've already used collections, I've already used collection view, and I've already used source collection. That's how IntelliSense knows that they're a part of my orders. And you can see here that we're getting it's unable to determine really anything about it. Now down here in my Angular 2 TypeScript stuff, you can see that I'm using details this time, but as I do details dot and I type call, it's actually going to fill everything in the APIs that are available to me in my details collection view. And more importantly, not only is it going to give me everything that's in there, but it's actually going to start telling me if it's a property or an object or a method or something like this. And right here in our IDE, it's going to give us a small description of what it's actually doing. So this was really nice for me when I was doing my migration, because I kind of forget some things. I don't always remember all the APIs that are available to me. So as I was converting it, I was able to actually use TypeScript, and I didn't really have to go back to the APIs very often. So those are some of the tools and features and things I've used to do to migrate my application from Angular 1 to Angular 2, and I encourage you guys to use these if you go to convert as well. But let me kind of get into some of the meat and potatoes of Angular 2. So we'll start with a module. And a module should be dedicated to a single purpose, right? So usually a module will export one thing, such as a class. And that's actually what we're going to be doing in our demonstration today. We're actually going to be exporting a class. So way on the far right-hand side of the screen, you'll see export class porting from SL. I just copied that out of my code just to show you there what that looks like. And then in the middle there, you'll see a code snip from our application that tells TypeScript that this is a module, its class is public, and it's going to be accessible to other modules in the application. And here we can see how we actually import our porting from SL module into other modules using that import statement. And then finally, Angular is going to include some things for us that we're going to need to import into our class. And the two that we'll be working with today is component and view. Now, if you're still using the alpha version of Angular 2, you're going to want to be importing component and view from Angular 2/Angular 2. In beta, they actually changed it to Angular 2/core. So just be aware that these things are changing. And I actually, when I converted this the first time, I converted it up to Angular 2 alpha. And then I had to go back through and then convert it over to beta as well. So the next thing is a component. So we're actually going to define a component's application logic, what it does to support the view inside the class, inside the module. The class is going to interact with the view through a series of APIs that expose properties and methods. So this should sound familiar if you've done some object-oriented programming before. So think of a component as something that controls a patch of screen real estate, which we in the Angular team are going to be referring to as a view. Most everything that the user sees will be a view controlled by a component. So each component is going to have a companion template that we're going to provide. And I'll show you guys this in our demonstration at the end here as well. So Angular 2 is going to create, provide updates, and destroy components as the user moves throughout the application. The component is going to be comprising here of two parts. A TypeScript class, which has a TypeScript file extension. It's going to implement the model and the controller, which will expose the properties and events that we can actually use in the view. So we want to think of this as sort of like the code behind for the components view. The second core part is the view itself. And this is actually going to be sitting in an HTML file. So this defines sort of the look, and if you want to go down the rabbit hole more, you can actually define the feel of it as well if you want to introduce some CSS classes. And I'll demonstrate these when we get to the property and event bindings. And this next thing is sort of outside the scope of what we're going to be talking about today, but I wanted to let you guys know we can use components to provide the whole single page application look with nav menus, a special place where the current page should be shown, and we can actually provide additional routing. Although this is a simple application, I don't want to get too into routing since we're just going to be loading one controller. I mentioned with components that each component has a companion template. So we're actually going to need to define the components view in this template. And a template is going to be a form of HTML that is going to tell Angular how to render the component. So templates will generally look like HTML, but as we'll see, there's going to be some new syntax introduced here as well. And in fact, anywhere where you see a star is going to be the new Angular 2 syntax. So most of us are probably already familiar with the component template duality if we've worked with MVC and MVVM before. So in Angular, the component sort of plays the part of controller or view model. And then naturally, of course, our template is going to represent our view. So although almost all HTML syntax is going to be valid Angular 2 template syntax, there is a notable exception here, and that is going to be the script element. That's actually going to be forbidden. And the reason for this is because we want to eliminate the risk of a script injection attack. Obviously, some other HTML tags are not going to be very helpful to us, such as body and HTML. And it might be a little bit more clear when we get to the example. You can use, I guess you could put HTML and body into your template, but you're probably not going to see them too much in practice. We can also extend the HTML vocabulary of our templates and components with directives that are actually going to appear as new elements and attributes. So when we get to the template syntax part, I'll show you guys how we actually rewrote all of our Wixmo controls. So we have directives in there, elements and attributes, and then we're using the 4 new data binding techniques. So this is the second to last core building block of an Angular 2 application that I wanted to cover today. And these are actually metadata and decorators. So I kept it simple. For our decorators, I'm only focusing on component and view. And for our metadata, I'm only going to be using selector and template URL. So up until this point, we've really only talked about a class. You know, Angular 2 is still sort of unsure of what we're actually trying to do with our class. So it's not really a component until we attach some metadata or a decorator to it. So this is actually going to go, our decorator is going to go before our class definition. We really want to think of a decorator sort of as a function that can have configuration properties. And some of these configuration properties are metadata such as selector and template URL. So as you'll see in our application, our selector is actually going to be the thing that tells Angular what element in our application this component is going to control. And once it finds that selected element, it's going to go to our template URL and it'll actually pull that HTML and put it where that element was in our default HTML or view. The last one was data binding. So the first data binding that I wanted to discuss was interpolation. And that's just because it should already look familiar to you guys that are familiar with Angular 1. So interpolation is used to place strings into text between HTML element tags and within element or attribute assignments. So usually the items between the double curly braces is sort of a name of a component property, or perhaps you want to evaluate some sort of expression like 1 plus 1. Template expressions are obviously going to produce a value, like 2 for example, and Angular executes that expression and assigns it to a property of a binding target. The next process here, the next one on this list is a template statement that responds to an event raised by a binding target such as an element, component, or directive. So think of this one as sort of having a side effect. We're going to be responding to events here. And these are going to, of course, update our view. So the first two are sort of one way from data source to view target. So these would be things like properties, attributes, classes, or styles. And the third one is going to be one way from view target to data source. So this will be used kind of for an event. And then finally, we have our two-way binding, which is very similar to what like ng model was in Angular 1. So in conclusion, data binding is a mechanism for coordinating what the user is going to see on the screen. So while we could push and pull values manually, it's much easier just to sort of let a framework do all these chores for us. And it is worth noting that you don't always have to use the brackets or the parens. You can use bind, dash, whatever, if you'd like to get rid of brackets and parens in your view. So those are sort of some of the main building blocks of Angular 2. So how do they sort of fit into our data services quick start application. So when we get to Visual Studio, I'll show you guys that in the code. But I wanted to walk you through through words what we're actually going to be doing in this application. So to begin, we will load some data from the Northwind data source. Have any of you guys worked with Northwind before? Pretty common, been around for a while. We're going to actually build 3 separate collection views from that Northwind data service. One is going to be for our customers, one is going to be for our orders, and then we're actually going to do a union of the 2, which we call details. So we're going to load these into our Wijmo collection views so that Wijmo's collection view can handle paginating our data, sorting it, filtering it, and kind of keeping track of our current selected item and everything like that. Like I said, I was trying to find ways to sort of offload as much work as possible onto these frameworks. So that's why I'm utilizing the collection view. The application will load a list of customers. When the user selects a customer, the app will then display the orders placed by that customer. So this should sound very familiar. It's probably like every other application you guys have written. As the user navigates around and controls, changes the controls around, the state of the application is obviously going to change. And Angular is going to take care of that for us. So for example, when a user selects a customer, the app is going to display only orders placed by that customer. Additionally, when the user selects an order, the app is only going to display details for that specific order on that customer. So this type of master detail relationship is a pretty common feature of many MVVM apps. Finally, we're going to bind some data to our controls. We're going to use a combo box to provide customer and orders, text box controls to provide order information, and finally, we'll use a flex grid to show our order details. We picked these 3 controls because most line of business applications utilize some sort of combo box or input box or data grid or something like this. So this is actually the original Silverlight application here. I took a screenshot of it just because if you go to this site, it's going to ask you to install the Silverlight framework and everything. So I just wanted to provide a screenshot for you guys just to see what it looks like. We have a start button with a combo box. Combo boxes, we have some input dates, input number, and a grid. And then here's actually a list of all of the queries that are coming over to us from our model. So we actually upgraded this application. We took it from Silverlight and we moved it over to HTML5 using Bootstrap and Angular 1. And then I took this a step further and added Angular 2 to it as well. I had to use some Wijmo controls like Wijmo.core, like collection view, the flex grid. I'm using our input number and input date and combo box picker. And the reason why I picked these is just because, like I said, they're line of business apps, but they really do a good job showcasing all of the different data bindings, like event binding and property bindings. And then finally, that table that displays a list of everything that we got back from our model, we're actually going to be using the new template syntax ng-foo. So when I looked at my Angular 1 application for the first time, I took some notes about what I needed to do here, what are some of the new things in Angular 2 that I need to address. So in Angular 1, we need to create a new app and basically, give it a controller, right? So in our body or HTML tag, we would have ng-app is equal to some app name. And then maybe in our div or something like this, we would have ng-controller equals app controller. And that would be where all of our business logic is. Well, we don't have any more controllers in Angular 2, so we'll have to address that. In Angular 2, we're actually going to need to organize everything, our app inside like a module. In this case, we're going to call working from SL. And it's in this module that we're really going to be leveraging the benefits of TypeScript. In Angular 2, we're going to have to move all of our markup into a app.html file, which is that template URL that we saw, and then metadata and decorators. And then finally, since we don't have ng-app in our HTML tag anymore, we need to introduce a root component loaders to basically kickstart Angular off. So this is not Bootstrap, the Twitter CSS JS framework, but this is actually an Angular Bootstrap function. As I said before, in Angular 1, we would basically tell Angular to bootstrap our application if it saw an ng app, an HTML body or div or something like that. The nice thing about Angular 1 is, we could reuse controllers across other ng apps. The controller in Angular 1 would then provide you everything that you needed via the scope object, which is really nice. So for example, you could assign a controller to a body or maybe to a simple div. For those of us that aren't really familiar with Angular 2, you'll see that this is no longer required. So we're going to define our Angular 2 components as elements, not as attributes of elements, if that makes sense. So no longer will we have HTML space ng app equals something, we'll just have a element tag for app. Here we're also going to be using system.js to actually load our Bootstrap file, which is going to contain everything Angular 2 needs to know to get up and running. So in order to get the application up and running, we actually need to do two things here. The first is to call Angular's browser bootstrap function, and then we're going to have to pass it sort of an application root component. Now for our example today, we only have one component, so that'll just be our root. But on the slides here, I made it a little bit more generic for us. So in our bootstrap.ts file, we would import some class from some relative file in, we'll say, app.ts. And then we just bootstrap, class and whatever component that is. And that will basically kick Angular off. It'll tell itself that class.component is going to be the root, and we can actually inherit everything else from class.component. And then inside our main page, or index.html, or default HTML, here's where our system import is, so we can import that in as well. I don't know why that duplicated right there, that's strange. So there are a few languages out there that really enable you as a developer to develop large-scale applications. A few of them are like CoffeeScript or PureScript or TypeScript. So you're probably wondering why I chose to convert my JavaScript into TypeScript. There's actually a few reasons for it. Well, the first of which is that we're going to be giving everything static types, and we can actually use modules and classes here as well. So now we have a strongly typed application. TypeScript is really easy to learn because it is just a superset of JavaScript. And TypeScript is nice because the current version of Angular is actually being developed in TypeScript. So if you remember in the beginning, I mentioned that Microsoft is developing TypeScript and Google is developing Angular 2. Well, it's pretty interesting that Google decided to pick up Microsoft's language, for their development. I traditionally come from a Visual Studio background, and TypeScript has a lot of built-in features running the Visual Studio, like I showed you guys earlier, like IntelliSense. So that's really nice. And there's also a lot of really great resources out there to learn TypeScript. Like I said, if you already know JavaScript, it should be a pretty easy conversion for you to pick up TypeScript. And I'll show you guys that in the code as well. At the end of the day, though, simply put, TypeScript is just going to compile into JavaScript. So whether or not you choose to use TypeScript or JavaScript, at the end of the day, we're still just going to have JavaScript. Maybe one day, browsers might support TypeScript without converting into JavaScript, but we're not there yet. So after we're finished porting the view model, I want to show you guys some things that are not included in Angular 2 that you might be looking for if you're used to Angular 1. These would be things like scopes and controllers. And finally, I want to show you guys how we're going to be handling the migration of our view. It's going to be a little different. It has a slightly different approach than what you've probably grown to know and love in Angular 1. And part of this is just because of the new template syntax, as well as the additional data binding features that we have available to us. So porting the model. So in the beginning, I had mentioned that our model is not going to change very much. We luckily got to use the same sort of model and data source that we used pretty much way back from the beginning. The only difference here is that in the Silverlight app, we're actually going to be requesting XML. And in our JavaScript and our Angular stuff, we're going to just be using JSON data to serve as our model. So there is the connection string for OData, the Northwind Data Service. And this made my life really easy because I could actually kind of lean on my model as I went through the application. I just knew that my model was working. So the next step here was porting the view model. So here we actually have to create some objects for our collection views, which are customer orders and details. Due to lack of screen space, I just put customers on the slide here. So inside our class, we're going to expose customers to our view, and we're going to tell it that it's a widmo.collections.collection view. Now, if you are new to TypeScript and you're sort of new to type safety or type concurrence, there's a feature in here you can actually just assign it any, and that will tell TypeScript to sort of ignore type check. So the first time I did this when I was converting JavaScript to TypeScript, I just assigned all of my properties and everything to any. And then I went back and double checked to make sure what these actually need to be. And then down here in our constructor is where I actually instantiated customers as a new collection view object. And we're going to use Ajax to load some data into these collection views based on our user input. The next step that I had to do was I had to port the view, and I broke this down into two slides. One for just converting the HTML stuff, and one for converting the Widmo controls to make it easier for you guys. So if we remember in Angular 1 offered us over 70 built-in directives. And of course, the community added thousands more, and people in this room probably wrote and developed their own directives as well. Well, in Angular 2, we can actually achieve the same result without needing all those special directives. And this is due to the more advanced binding system. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that in Angular 1, we had a built-in directive called ng-click. And that ng-click directive would fire some event. Well, in Angular 2, we have a event binding. So we just put click inside parentheses, and then we can call our onSave function. And then there's some new template syntax out there. I only picked ng4 to use in the demo today, because that's really the only one I could find that I can actually have use for in my application. But ng4 is a new template syntax, which is basically a repeater directive. We didn't have this in Angular 1. What this is going to do is it's going to basically produce a list of items. And the nice thing about this is it allows for a much easier literal reading of it. So what this line of code down here at the bottom, this is literally reading, take each JSON object in the query's resources array, store it in a local QH variable. So you'll see here we have our $sign that we're introducing. We're going to create a local variable, and we're going to expose it to the grid. And then at the end there, we're going to be capturing index as well. And this will basically just allow us to output 1 through X, however many items we have in our array. And then finally, we're going to use interpolation over there to actually just kind of output everything that's inside query resources. So porting the view for Widmo was pretty straightforward. We had already sort of converted all of our controls to support Angular 2 and all of the new data binding methods. So you can see, I just picked a few of them out here. Those are the 4 on the left, just again for you. We're setting some properties like whether or not it's required. We're doing something very similar in Angular 1, would be like ng model is equal to. Now we're just putting a two-way binding to value. And then same thing with like right down there as well. So how do you basically get your controller over into a module? Well, this is what a module looks like in TypeScript. So as we said, remember, modules export things. So here we're going to be exporting a class and an app. But here we have our decorators and metadata. So we have a module called porting from SL. Porting from SL is a component that is going to look through our default HTML and try to find an app element. Once it finds an app element, it's going to look at its view component, or its view version, or half of it, and it's going to say, hey, I got to go to my source, and there's an HTML file in there, and that's actually what the view is going to look like for this component. And then additionally, we can send some directives in there as well. So, and the code will actually be adding some Wishmo directives right there. And then all of our business logic that we had in our controllers is going to go inside our class down here inside app. Our default HTML or index, whatever default is, it's going to look, it's much, much simpler. So you'll see here that we could have our HTML and all of our script tags, and all of our stuff. We're going to have our body. And then all we need to do to bring our component into our page is just add the app element there to our page. So everything is really a component. And we want to think of a component as a single unit, which is a model, controller, and a view. So let's look at some code. Get off the slides here. All right. So here is the data services. Oops. So here's the data services quick start example. Now this is all Angular 1. It should look pretty familiar, just like every other application where we have some imports and things like that. Now here in our body, here's where we're calling our app, ng app. These are the attributes on the element. And we're giving it a controller as well, app controller. Now as we scroll down, you'll see that we have all of our line of business controls actually in our default HTML. So it's all right here in our default HTML page. Of course, we have our app, which we're going to inject some Wishmo dependencies into it so we can utilize it. The name of it is an app module. Now here is our controller. So we have an app control. We're going to give it, expose it to scope. But everything from here down is going to be pretty much similar to what we're going to see in our Angular 2 example. We don't really need to touch too much of this. So here's our service URL where we're actually connecting to our Northwind data service. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add our customers, orders, and details collection views to scope so we can use them later in the application or in our view. We have our query resources, which is just going to be an array. And then here is sort of our event handlers. So whenever the user changes their customer fields, we're actually going to do another data request and get some more details there on that specific customer. The same thing's going to be the case with our orders. So whenever our user changes the order combo box, we're just going to go out and fetch some different data sets and things like that. Here is our click event. So here's our event that we're demoing today. It's just the start button that sort of kicks off everything. Just loads some data into a collection view for us. And then here is just that function that loads the data. So you could, if you wanted to make, I don't know if make it life easier for you or not, but you can move this into a service if you'd like. And then you just have to inject the service into this component to be able to utilize this load data function. The first time I did this, I had it using a service, but it wasn't very clear, and I think it just looked better if it was all in one place in the demo. So just be aware that you can offload this off to a service, just make sure that you inject it in the beginning. So let's go over and see what Angular 2 looks like. The same example will look like an Angular 2 application. So let's start where we started before. This is our default HTML. Now, like I said, I originally did this in Angular 2 Alpha, and I've since converted to Angular 2 Beta. And while we were doing it, I was using some Wishmo controls that, when I went to Beta, I was trying to use Wishmo controls that were still in Alpha. So there's a lot of stuff in here, and I'm not entirely sure what I needed to get rid of and what I didn't. But you can see here, I was using Alpha version 45, which was the last version of Alpha. That's commented out. But anyways, Here's our system.js where we're going to be loading our Bootstrap file. And that's really all we have to do here in our default HTML. It's just basically tell Angular where to get started. And where it's going to know to get started is it's going to go look in that Bootstrap file. Our view is going to look much simpler. So I decided to leave the header tag and the description of the application in there. But as you'll see here, instead of having all those Wishmo controls listed here, we're just going to place our app right there. And this text in here is just a placeholder that will sit there whenever it is. So I had placeholder here before. But you can put something in here like, like loading, please wait, or maybe like error. This is just basically the text that will show up if you can't find your component. So let's take a look at what our Bootstrap file would actually look like. So I remember I said that an Angular application is sort of a collection of modules where everything's sort of importing and exporting things. So here in our Bootstrap file, we need to import a couple of things. Enable production mode, we just need to use it so that there's not a bunch of errors and some more original stuff or warnings. We need to be importing Bootstrap from Angular 2 platform browser. The first time I saw this, I thought it was a little strange that browser was in there. The reason for this is because there's a few other things, like I guess we're doing like SEO stuff. You can actually call different Bootstrap functions to do like server-side rendering, things like that. So just kind of be aware of that. We're going to need to import our Wishmo controls as well. So here we're going to be using our Wishmo input and our data grid. And then finally, we want to expose our porting from SL to our Bootstrap function. So we're going to import porting from SL. We're going to use its relative file path here. And it's going to know that it's app.ts. So it's going to find that. And then we'll bootstrap the entire thing. So let's take a look at what the app.ts will look like here. So now this is TypeScript. Don't get too afraid because this can just simply be converted into JavaScript. It will at runtime. We need to import component and view, some other things as well from Angular 2 core. We're using data here. Now we additionally need to bring in our Wishmo as well here with importing. And then we're actually going to export this module. Now as we saw on the slides, we have a selector, which the selector is going to look in our markup for app. So that's where it knew to find app. That's why I called it app in my default HTML. And then we have our template URL. This is a little different from what we'd seen in our Angular 1 example. In the Angular 1 example, all of the stuff in this app.html was actually sitting inside our default HTML. So this was nice. We were able to kind of encapsulate things a little nicer. And then finally, we have to include some directives as well. These ones here capitalized, I don't think they're going to be required when Angular 2 goes stable. But I think for beta right now, it might complain if you don't have those in there. But our which input is a module which has classes in it. So we'll make sure that we have those directives available to us. And then inside the export class app, this is where all of our business logic is actually going to go. So this is everything that we saw inside our controller. There's just a few notable exceptions. I'm actually just telling the view that these are what these are actually going to be. So customers, orders, and details, I'm letting the view know that they're going to be collection views. Query resources, I'm just going to say it can be anything. And same thing with current item. And then moving down, we have our constructor. And inside our constructors, where we're going to do our initializations and our assignments. So we actually are going to create a new collection view for each one of these, assign an object to current item, and then all the rest of this should look very similar. So here's our customers handler, which will go fetch more data. Here's the one for our orders. Here's our start button click here. That gets the application running. And then here is just our load data utility function. So this should all look very familiar with what we saw in the previous example. So like I said, this is sort of every component has a companion template. So our companion template is going to be app.html. And the reason why it knows that is because of, in our decorators up here, this is actually what we're saying. We're saying the template URL is going to be found in source and app.html. So let's take a look at what that looks like here. So this is, we have our button. Here's our event binding. So you note that we don't need ng click anymore. We have some property bindings here. And here's some of our which mode directives, which combo box. For example, here we're saying that it is editable or it's not editable. We're assigning item source to orders. And if you remember that, we actually have an event handler on this as well. We have some two-way data bindings here for our number. Same thing with date. We're using the two-way. Now here's our flex grid. Our flex grid just basically has a lot of property bindings. There's not many event bindings here. Like I said, the collection view is going to handle a lot of stuff for us, like filtering and paginating and everything like that. So we don't have to get too carried away with this. The one thing I did want to show you guys, though, is the new template syntax. So here it is actually being used. Actually, I didn't show you what it looked like in Angular 1. Let me show you guys what it looks like in Angular 1 quick. So here in Angular 1, we actually were using the ng repeat directive built in, and we're saying, QH in query resources. In Angular 2, though, we can actually use the ng4. So the difference here is that you'll see we have this little star, and we're actually creating, we're using the hashtag sign and the pound sign here to assign a local variable. And that's really nice because we can actually access things of QH down here as well. And of course, we're getting our index. So we can output, 1 through 7, 8, 9, 10, and then we'll just create a link to the data that we actually want to see. So there's going to be an error here, and I want to show you guys. Let me just say, I think that my application is really well done. I'm really happy with what I did, and I go to click run. Now, if I was working with just JavaScript, it would just go right through. There'd be no problems. But here it's actually saying, hey, wait, I found an error. So let's see what that error is actually. I can continue through it and you'll ignore it. But let's just run the last successful build. That's the name of the stream. Now you see here my application loaded just fine. And if I take a look here in my debugger, you'll see that I do have some errors down here, but nothing critical. So I'm not sure what Visual Studio is complaining about. So let's go back and take a look. And down here, it's actually telling me at design time that, hey, wait a minute, this property call doesn't actually exist in a collection view type. So this is an error that I'm actually seeing at design time that I probably won't find at runtime. So I can actually come in here and fix that. So let me go ahead and stop it. So it's saying at line 48 in app.ts. So let's go take a look at that. Right here. You also note that I'm getting my red squiggly line here. That's because it knows a detail, basically what we did up here, right here. It knows detail is going to be a collection. Right? So here, it's gonna look for everything that's included in the collection view. So I can come in here and maybe add new. And this was really nice and really helpful when I was doing development. I never had to go back to the APIs. I could just come in here and read exactly what it needed me to do. So that's a really nice feature. So let me just delete this line here. Let's run it. This time we should get no errors, I hope. See the screen that pops up. So let me go ahead and click start. Oh. Now it's actually running. Let me click start. So here you can see we have our combo boxes populating from our collection view orders. We have customers being filled in that combo box. We have a date picker here. We're displaying all this data in a nice grid. And if we're interested to see what we're actually requesting, we can come down here and take a look at each one of these query resources. So if I find kind of a weird bug, I can just click on this. There's my JSON string. But as you can see, as we navigate around the application, the state's going to change. And Angular is kind of taking care of all this for us. This is pretty cool. So in conclusion, I really liked working with Angular 2. I think it's a lot simpler to do a lot of tasks. By utilizing TypeScript, I was able to find errors that I wouldn't be able to find maybe at runtime. It's really, really cool. So I'd encourage you guys to check it out. As I said, I did cover things like routing and dependency injections and things like that. If you go to our website, we do have a sample. It's our Explorer sample. It's written in Angular 2, and it does a good job sort of showcasing how you can use class inheritance in your application. So what we did was we had sort of have a base flex grid, and as we demonstrate, functionality with that grid, we have different classes and different modules, and each one of those inherits sort of the base grid. So I didn't really get into that a whole lot today because I think that's pretty complicated. But if you're interested in seeing it, it is in the Explorer sample. All of this will be on widmo.com. We have a lot of really great resources up there. Like I said, the Silverlight MVVM HTML5 webinars up there. The website for Angular 2 is angular.io. And my email is rossdieter@gravecity.com. So if you guys have any questions or something that I didn't talk about that maybe you guys wanted to hear more about, shoot me an email. I'd be more than happy to. I don't get a lot of emails anymore, so I'd be happy to see some. Not that many people complain about not getting too many emails, but definitely shoot me an email. I really appreciate it. So thank you guys. You guys were a great audience. I have a limited number of t-shirts down here. I'll put on this table here. You guys are feeling more than welcome to grab one on the way out. And thank you again.